we're going to have our first speaker, who is Jenny Willmott from Scottish Lesbians. Jenny co-founded Scottish Lesbians with her partner Lorraine Douglas in 2022 as a grassroots group campaigning for lesbian rights and well-being. And thank you so much, Jenny. So over to you.
So yes, thank you. I'm here as one of the co-founders of Scottish Lesbians. We've been going about 18 months. And it's a grassroots group for lesbians with a focus on campaigning for lesbian rights. So, for example, we met members of the Scottish Parliament to discuss issues, especially in the run-up to the Gender Recognition Reform Bill at the end of last year. We've written to MPs and MSPs. We've attended demonstrations and protests. And we have a couple of online spaces where women, lesbians can interact safely. So we gatekeep those spaces extremely carefully. We are aware of the risk of men wanting to join them. Lesbian groups are a particularly popular source of validation for trans identifying men. And we're aware of groups where infiltration has happened. So that's something that we do our very best to guard against. But today I want to talk about the research that we did last year, and we've done the report, which is now out and available on our website. So we undertook this research to provide data in an area where data is really lacking. And I think for the lesbians in the audience now, a lot of what I'm going to say won't be new. But what is new is doing it as formal lesbian-focused research, as far as we're aware. An awful lot of lesbian research published now either lumps lesbians in with LGBTQ+, or it uses a definition of lesbian which we just don't recognise. You often see that written as lesbian with an asterisk, or researchers will use lesbian as an umbrella term, an inclusive term, which is something that we just don't agree with. And that's something that's been going on for a lot of years. And for us, lesbians are exclusively same-sex attracted women, and any other definition is wrong, basically. We are going to attempt to get the report published, and like I said, it's available on our website, which is scottishlesbians.org.uk. And we did our recruiting for the study online, mostly via social media, mostly Twitter, and via word of mouth. And we made the study available to lesbians who came out at any time and in any country. And our inclusion criteria made it very clear that the study was only open to exclusively same-sex attracted women. And we used a Google form to collect the data. That included some consent and basic demographic questions, followed by 6 open questions designed to explore lesbians' experiences of coming out. That included things that were challenging, things that made it easier, and their experiences of lesbian community. And it was an exploratory study, so we didn't want to push or encourage women in any particular direction with their answers. And we actually had 73 submissions in total, of which 72 met the criteria of being from exclusively same-sex attracted women. The other submission was from a woman who just didn't meet the criteria. She reported being attracted to men, and she answered using TRA slogans and statements about TERFs. The age range of the participants was 18 to 81. 30 participants were under 40, and 10 were aged between 18 and 25. And we were really, really pleased to have reached so many younger women. 60% of the respondents came from non-UK countries, 13 different countries. So 40% of respondents were from the UK. And I want to make the point here that the study isn't global. We achieved pretty good reach, but it can't be described as global. Only one response came from a woman in a country where homosexuality is illegal. So the vast majority of respondents were women in countries where it's legal to be a lesbian and there's good access to the internet. And the study generated a lot of data, a really very rich and complex data set, which we analysed using thematic analysis. And we identified 4 main themes, and then considered what these could mean for lesbians using self-efficacy as a framework. I'm not going to talk too much about self-efficacy theory today. There's a discussion section in the report which goes into what it's about. I really want to focus today on the themes that we identified. So the 4 themes that came out of this were naming ourselves and being heard, role models, representation and making connections, porn culture, fetishization and the male gaze, and gender ideology. And as I said before, I'm guessing that women here aren't necessarily going to be surprised by those themes, but we hope that that's because the study is a true reflection of the pressures on lesbians at the moment. And there is considerable crossover between the themes, which we highlight in the report, and I'll mention as we go along. The first theme, naming ourselves and being heard. So that bit at the top in the purple box there is a direct quote from one of the participants. And it reflects just how daunting and challenging some women find the word lesbian. And respondents gave several reasons for having difficulty with lesbian as a word, including its use as a slur, along with other words like dyke, the negative effects of Section 28 in the UK, and in one of the very obvious crossovers, porn culture and gender ideology. And central to naming ourselves as lesbians is the sexual boundary implied in that word lesbian. Lesbians are exclusively same-sex attracted women. We completely exclude men. And some respondents reported that initially they defined themselves as bisexual, or in some other way left open the possibility that they might consider men as partners. And in some cases, they did this to kind of protect their families from having a lesbian in the family. And closely linked to this is the concept that some respondents described of lesbianism being seen as a phase or something that's open to change, something that you could maybe summarize as you just need to meet the right man. And while that is obviously a difficult reaction to get from a loved one, some respondents reported outright abuse, including being threatened with being ostracized from the family, threats of violence or actual physical violence, being forced to watch pornography, and rape. And the women described in very moving terms the catastrophic results that this had, including forcing themselves into heterosexual relationships. And thankfully, that wasn't a universal experience for women. Other respondents described receiving acceptance and reassurance from family members. Role models, representation, and connections. We asked respondents to tell us about things which made coming out either to themselves or to others easier or more difficult, and about their experiences of lesbian community. And a lot of respondents mentioned role models and representation. And for some women, seeing positive representations of lesbians was key to realizing that they were in fact lesbians themselves. For others, positive representation helped to counter social hostility. So one respondent, for example, remembered the absolutely horrible stories in the British media during the height of the AIDS crisis in the 1980s, and how reading lesbian literature and seeing those positive representations really helped her. Knowing lesbians in person was also felt to be helpful. And the lack of real life lesbian role models made media representations even more important. For lesbians growing up more recently, online resources were helpful. So one lesbian in a country where homosexuality is illegal found YouTube videos helpful and has actually been able to come out to her mum. But of course, representation is not always either positive or helpful. One respondent was concerned about the number of lesbian characters on the television who end up sleeping with a man, reinforcing the belief that lesbianism is a phase, something that can be fixed if you meet the right man. And lesbian spaces were mentioned by many respondents as being hugely important, but they were described in nostalgic terms as things that no longer exist. That includes the lesbian spaces, the lesbian-only activist groups, the cultural groups. And some of the young women were aware of what used to be out there, what used to exist, and were really sorry. They really lamented the loss of those spaces and groups. And one or two respondents mentioned problems with lesbian community, and for example, the focus on bars and alcohol, or with interpersonal or group dynamics. Women are human, but on the whole, women felt that having that representation, that visibility, that connection to other lesbians was very positive, and the lack of those things could leave women very isolated and unhappy. Porn culture, fetishization, and the male gaze. The Nordic Model Now conference that's also on today has highlighted so many of the issues that pornography causes for women, including lesbians. Lesbian is the most searched for porn category in many countries, including Scotland. And this theme is almost the kind of the other side of the coin to the previous theme. So on the one hand, you've got a lack of real life positive role models for lesbians. And on the other, you've got a vast amount of pornographic distortion and misrepresentation, all of it produced for the heterosexual male gaze. And several respondents linked pornography to difficulties for lesbians when coming out. Some, again, linked it to difficulties with the actual word lesbian, because it's linked with the sexualization of women and the centering of men. And others linked it to young women in particular opting out of being a lesbian altogether and choosing another identity. And that's something that I'll come on to in the next theme. And part of this theme is the concept of the cotton ceiling, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. But if there's anyone who hasn't come across the cotton ceiling, the cotton refers to women's underwear. So the cotton ceiling is the barrier to heterosexual men having sexual relationships with lesbians. Angela Wilde was the first person to research the cotton ceiling, and yeah, her work has been really, really helpful in bringing this out. There is a male version of it as well, the boxer ceiling. And we've included the cotton ceiling in this theme because it's part of the repackaging of lesbianism for male interests. Again, on the one hand, you've got the production of pornography by and for men. And on the other hand, you've got the redefinition of lesbianism itself to include men. It's all about the men. And the lesbians who responded to our study are feeling pressured, both to accept men in their groups and to accept them as romantic partners. Some of this pressure actually comes from other lesbians who are willing to include men in their spaces, and are quite willing for other women to include them as other lesbians, to include them as partners. And some respondents painted very disturbing pictures of the behaviour of some of these men who have been admitted to lesbian spaces and to services such as dating apps. And it's another reason why we're very, very careful about gatekeeping with our groups. And there was a strong feeling amongst respondents that lesbianism has been taken from us and presented to men, both by those who watch and produce and watch pornography and those who want to be seen and treated as women and as lesbians. This is a qualitative study, so we're not looking to make any statistical claims from our data, but the vast majority of the respondents raised gender ideology as something which is having a negative effect on lesbians. And this wasn't unexpected. Only 2 respondents mentioned gender ideology in a neutral or positive way. And another point with this is that discussions of gender and self-ID are often focused on safety. And safety is, of course, really important. But our data shows that lesbians need spaces and representation for their own sake. It's not just about safety. The impacts of not having spaces, not having representation can be really dramatic. And gender ideology, really, the impact reflects all the themes I've spoken about so far and permeates everything. When young lesbians name themselves now, they may avoid the use of lesbian, choosing instead something that doesn't really tell you anything. For example, queer or sapphic non-binary, terms which don't indicate what's going on for that young person at all, or even what sex they are. And parallel to this, there's been a shift towards the adoption of the term lesbian by people who are not and can never be lesbians, especially men. And as I mentioned earlier, the term lesbian sets out our sexual boundaries. If the meaning of the word lesbian is shifted to include non-women, what does that mean for our boundaries? As one respondent said, if lesbian now includes men, lesbians might find it easier to come out as something else. It was really sad, actually, reading some of these responses. And another respondent pointed out that any move away from coming out as lesbians is likely to be embraced by those who would prefer us, even if it's only superficially, to be straight. And gender ideology was raised again as causing problems with representation, which meant that lesbians struggled to see themselves. One woman said the redefinition of lesbian to include men made her feel like a freak for only being attracted to women. Again, really very, very sad. And many respondents mentioned the impact of gender ideology on lesbians' ability to meet, socialize, and organize together. I'm sure you're all aware that the Australian Human Rights Commission has now ruled that the Lesbian Action Group in Australia cannot legally exclude men from meetings aimed at lesbians, although they have now, I think, decided to appeal that decision. And lesbians reported that spaces using the word lesbian in an inclusive way or as an umbrella term made them feel unwelcome or even unsafe. It led to lesbians self-excluding from those kind of spaces. And a lot of women mentioned the harm being caused by the splits that this is causing in lesbian community, leading to lesbians who don't wish to include men in lesbian groups being ostracized or, again, self-excluding because they don't want to be bigots. And there was considerable overlap between this theme and the previous one about porn culture and the male gaze. We've used extensive quotes from respondents in the study, and many of the quotes could have been placed in either theme 3 or theme 4. Women often mention pornography and gender self-ID and fetishization in the same statement. And as men become emboldened and in some cases encouraged to fetishize lesbians, enter lesbian spaces and identify as lesbians, it's increasingly challenging for lesbians to define ourselves and our boundaries. And 2 groups were highlighted by participants as being particularly vulnerable to gender ideology: young lesbians and butch or androgynous lesbians. And respondents often painted a pretty bleak picture for young lesbians. They're transphobic if they don't accept men as partners, and they've got role models who present themselves as trans men rather than lesbian, and they've got no lesbian community to turn to. And again, the impact on butch lesbians, this often reflected the pressure that they would have felt to transition rather than come out as lesbians. And they use quite stark language about butch lesbians becoming extinct, decimated, disappeared. As I said, the data set was very complex, very big and very complex. These issues were also raised by respondents. They weren't as dominant in the data as the 4 themes that we picked out, but all of them would be worthy of further exploration on their own. As I said, we were really fortunate to get some young lesbians aged 18 to 25, and this is some of what they said. I think they are feeling the pressure, and since we did the study, we've met more young lesbians, and certainly they are getting organized, they're getting angry, they are as much as they can organizing themselves, and trying to build communities. But of course, it's extremely difficult if they want to exclude men. So in conclusion, it's important to point out that coming out, as every lesbian here will know, it's not a one-off event. You don't just come out and that's it. It's an ongoing process throughout life. You might not do it every week, but you're certainly going to do it more than once. And you're going to be making decisions about coming out on a reasonably regular basis. And so all of the themes that I've spoken about so far are going to have an impact each time you do that. And lesbians' ability and confidence to come out is impacted by multiple factors. And for many lesbians, it remains difficult. You might think that there's been an increase in acceptance of homosexuality, but we do need role models, we need representation, we need spaces, and we need all of those things to be for actual lesbians. And gender ideology has an intensifying effect on all the existing issues that lesbians face. It causes unique and, at the moment, very present difficulties for lesbians in and of itself, but it intensifies everything else. And self-ID, I know there are women here from lots of different countries, but just speaking for Scotland, although self-ID, it was passed by the Scottish Parliament, and then the UK government said no, basically. So we don't have legally self-ID in Scotland, but we have de facto self-ID. And I think that's the case in a lot of countries. The practices and policies and, changing rooms and all the rest of it have moved ahead of the law in Scotland, as I'm sure they have in other countries. And that's a huge issue. And as we said in the last bit, the pressure to include and centre males is central to absolutely everything that I've spoken about today. If you could put up the next slide, please. That's got a few voices of resilience and hope, because some women did want, we gave women the opportunity to kind of say anything else that they wanted to add. And a lot of women did take that opportunity to give us messages, basically, which was really nice. And these were some of the voices of resilience and hope that came out of it. Like I say, you can download a copy of the report from our website. The report's on our website, which is scottishlesbians.org.uk. You can also email us, or you can send us a Twitter DM, whichever's easiest.